Mars Hill, famous. Any of you not know why we're here or what happened here? I think you all know. It's more of the footsteps of the apostles. Again, since Troas, we've been following things all the way down here. Paul has left Berea. He got run out of town. Now he's over here in Athens. And as you read the text here in Acts 17, it says, while Paul was waiting for Silas and Timothy in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. Now, down here in the Agora, you see the temple of Hephaestus down there, and that whole area. Yes, it's a marketplace, but it's just riddled with idolatrous areas. There's a lot of idols down there. And he sees all the idols down here. We don't know if he ever went up in the Acropolis, but Paul looks at this and he goes, it's not like a tourist saying, wow, isn't this beautiful? He's thinking, these people, they're lost. They're following false gods. They're just lost. And his heart breaks for them because he has the words that will give eternal life. He has the gospel, and it's going to the Gentiles. And here he's in the city that's full of the Gentiles, but there's also a synagogue here. So he reasoned in the synagogue, verse 17, with the Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happen to be there. So he's preaching in the marketplace, he's reasoning with people. This is a city of reason, a city of discussion. He's down there. So when you go down to the Agora, realize that then this is the Greek Agora, the Roman Agora is down there. He's going to these places where all the people are, and he's reasoning with them about the gospel. Well, a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with him. Some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So they took him and they brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. These guys are snobs. They're busybodies, but they're very, very smart. Now, I just made a list here. I couldn't remember all of these, so I wrote it down. Just bear with me. You've got the Stoics, and you got the Epicureans. And I'm going to tell you what they believe for a reason, so listen to this. First of all, the Stoics believed about creation that impersonal forces came together and made everything that is. The Epicureans believe something different. These guys are in the same room. It's crazy that they would be there. The Epicureans believed in something that you may know called atomism. They were naturalistic and they didn't believe in any divine creator at all. The Stoics were pantheists. The Epicureans believed that God was an impersonal force, superior, but you never prayed to him because you didn't know who he was and you couldn't. The Stoics believed about sin. Frankly, they had no concept of sin. Just the failure to be ideal, the failure to act up to what we could be according to the laws of nature. The Epicureans had no concept of sin. They just told their whole thing was to avoid pain. What a life. Let's avoid pain. They both believed in fate that controlled their destinies. Their ethics of the Stoics were to pursue virtue. The ethics of the Epicureans was to live according to nature. The Stoics believed in an afterlife that was kind of like nirvana. Your life force would continue, but your consciousness is gone. The Epicureans believed nothing. They had a saying that said, I was not, I was, I am not, I care not. That's life. Man. And of course, hell, none, and none. These are the guys that say, you seem to be talking about something strange to us. Now there's talking about a Messiah, Paul's talking about a Messiah, and he's talking about the resurrection. The resurrection to these guys wasn't an event, it was a God. It was another God that they really didn't get. Come and tell us about it because we want to hear so that we can sit around all day, drink coffee, and debate. That's what they want to do. So, Paul is invited to Mars Hill, to the Areopagus. Some people say it was a structure that was elsewhere. This is identified as the place where it was, so we'll go with that. There's nothing here now except the people, the stone, the trash. That's what's here. But it was apparently in this area right here. Now, as Luke continues rather, Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus' resurrection. They invited him to come up. Then Paul stood up in a meeting of the Areopagus. I mean, these rocks probably heard him say this. And he said, "Men of Athens." Now, I'm going to stop right there for a second. Paul has come under fire by theologians and pastors for what he's about to say. That there is this criticism that Paul tried to relate so much to the Athenians that he didn't really preach the gospel. He didn't really bring up theological things that they could really chew on. He tried to be, very relevant to them. This sermon gives you the genius of God. And that's really an understatement, because how can you label God as a genius when he made everything that is and knows everything? But truly, Paul was listening to the Lord when he said this. Now, I know the outcome of it was really small. Not a lot of people came to Christ. Well, that's bad, but it's up to the Lord at this point what's going to happen with all of that. Plant the seed, see what happens later. Not much ever happened here in Athens, but here's what Paul said. He said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and observed your objects of worship," right down there, said, "I observed your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Now what you worshipped as something unknown, I am going to proclaim to you." I'm going to tell you a story that Paul knew, a story that the Epicureans and the Stoics knew, a story that every Athenian who was ever educated knew. Over 600 years before Jesus, there was a poet whose name was Epimenides the Cretan. He was a Greek poet. And at that time, he was living here in Athens. At that time, Athens didn't look like this. But at that time, they still had this agora down here, and this is important to the story. A plague at that time broke out in Athens, and it was a doozy. It killed a third of the people in the city and was about to wipe out the rest. It lingered for months. The effect of the plague was best described as Ebola. Now, it probably wasn't, but it was something along those lines where you would bleed out of all your pores, and it was a painful, agonizing, horrible, stinking death. And of course, people were dying all over the place. Rarely when somebody got this plague did they ever survive. You can tell, very religious city even back then, and they're all crying out to their idols about saving us. They're giving sacrifices to the idols, and they're cutting themselves, kind of like the prophets of Baal would do. They're flogging themselves. They're doing everything just to cry out to mercy to the gods. Please save us, save us, save us. And nothing is happening. Epimenides has a dream. His dream is, you're going to see tomorrow when you wake up a flock of sheep down in the agora. Remember, it didn't look like this in those days too, but that's where it was. You're going to find a flock of sheep. When you find that flock of sheep, then you need to follow the sheep because they're going to move. And when they move and where they move, follow them until they stop. And when they stop, build an altar, kill a sheep. The plague will go away. This dream comes out of nowhere. So he gets up in the morning, goes down to the agora. There's a flock of sheep. The sheep start moving. They go to a certain spot, they stop. He builds an altar, takes one of the sheep, sacrifices the sheep. In 2 days, the plague abated. It went away. This was the unknown God. They don't know who this God was, but they got a dream through Epimenides who said, do this and the plague will go away. Who's this God? Nobody up here, nobody down there. Who's this God? Paul says, I'm going to tell you who he is, because the Epicureans and the Stoics already know the power of this unknown God. He did everything that none of the other gods could even touch, or at least they were not willing to do in their minds. So let's read his sermon here, as you know it well. The God that made the world, now he's a cosmological God. He's not just one of the gods that lives in a temple. This is the God over everything. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built with hands. Now he's telling them about that unknown God that they know has all this power, can stop a plague dead in its tracks. Let me tell you who it is. And he said he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man he made every nation of men so that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he determined the time set for the exact places where they should live. And God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. You know which poet he's quoting? Epimenides. Now does it make sense? His message is so simple. They can't miss it. And it's something that's part of their history, part of their lore. And suddenly Paul says the God that stopped the plague is the God of the earth, the God of the universe, the God of all people. He sets up everything the way he wants to set it. And he does this so that people would reach out to him. Hint, hint, right? Reach out, that they would seek him. And then he quotes Epimenides. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows exactly what the words that he is saying is doing to his audience. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone. There it is. An image made by man's design and skill. Oh, they were good at it. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. Now they realize he's not talking about another God named resurrection. He is talking about the resurrection. And they don't like that. And that's when they go, scoff, scoff, scoff. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. At that, Paul left the council. A few men became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. Naming the woman tells us that she was a patroness. She was very wealthy. Paul never compromised the gospel. The pressure is on in this world. Keep your mouth shut. You're interfering with my lifestyle. You're interfering with my sexual preferences. You're interfering with my greed. You're interfering with my ego, my self-esteem. Just be quiet. And I'm reading more and more pastors are starting to wake up. Whatever happened to the Great Commission? It's always been there. Paul is doing it. But Paul isn't doing it wrong. He's doing it exactly right. He's telling them about the God that they actually knew about all along and never understood. Now you get the picture. And unfortunately here they just said, another day, another day. Well, you have a message. You have the gospel. We still have the Great Commission. Go into all the world. Make disciples. Preach the gospel. Baptize people. This is our Great Commission. It's yours. It's not just for your pastor. We keep thinking this is the pastor's work. This is the missionary's work. It's yours. It's ours. And the fact is, we never compromise the message. We don't water it down. We don't dilute it. And Paul didn't do it here. He just put it in a form where they could say, I understand your God now. And their reaction, I don't like it. But have you forgotten the parable of the sower? In the parable of the sower, seeds went out all over the place. But there were 4 categories of soil, and only one bore fruit. So, hey, Paul is sad. Paul is here alone. The guys are coming for him, and eventually he's going to move on to Corinth, not long after this, where we're going tomorrow. And when he gets there, he sends the city into an upheaval, but he stays there for a good long time too. And many wonderful things happen. So now you know, this is Mars Hill. And Paul's message was exactly what God wanted it to be. And he started that message not at the resurrection of Christ. He started that message 600 years before Jesus was ever born. God's always setting stuff up. Never underestimate that he's been there already. When you walk into a situation, you're not walking in blind. God's been your eyes. He's seeing, he's doing things. This is amazing, and this is Mars Hill.